Hello everyone, how are you doing today? So we are back with another Ascendancy Battle. This time it's the third one. It's just been me and Try in the past, but we have invited a very special guest from the Still Sane podcast. You know him and love him, Dreamcore. What I want to start off by doing is tell me how you guys are doing, but we'll go through and we knew we were going to pick the Templar. What were your first thoughts? Don't give anything away, but we'll start off with you, Try.
Definitely. So I'm doing well today. I played a lot of the non-Path of Exile game last night, so I'm really in the Path of Exile mood this morning. And when you first said we should do a Templar battle, my mind immediately went not to light and paladin-esque themes, but to darkness. So that's just a little taste of what my Templar Ascendancy is going to look like.
How about you, Dream?
Yeah, mine's got a bit of darkness theme there going as well. But I think initially my idea was to go for a gladiator style ascendancy, like a paladin, I should say, but that's kind of lost their divine right almost. You know, they're kind of not really in tune with it. But we'll see. We'll see how we get on with it.
Okay, yeah, I feel like as soon as it came up as an idea, we were in the Discord, just made a little chat, and it was like, everyone immediately was like, yeah, let's do Dark Paladin. So how this is going to go, we are going to present our ideas. Each of us is going to present. I've got a tree and some artwork, and then we're going to have initial reactions. We'll go through each of them, and then at the end, we'll put up a poll, and then you'll be able to vote. So if you're watching this on the VOD, the poll is live now. Let us know who you think won, and the important reason for doing that is that we are going to be having a forfeit. Okay, so there's winners and losers, there's stakes at play, and I haven't even run this by the guys. But you're here now, so you've got to commit. So I think what we do, last time we did this, it was PoE 1, we were going into 325, me and Try, and we said, okay, the first divine that drops of the league, you have to give it to the winner. So this time round, there's 3 of us. So what we're going to do is second place is going to, at some point in the league, it doesn't have to be any time, they're going to transfer over a number of Chaos Orbs relative to the number of days that's gone by in the league. So the longer you leave it, the more expensive it gets, right? And third place, we're going to be doing the same thing. So third place is going to be giving the winner whatever the equivalent of a divine orb is. So we don't know 100%, but there's probably a good chance that it might end up being divine orbs again. That's a whole other topic. What currency ends up becoming that premium tier 1 currency for trade? But whatever that thing becomes, the third place is going to be giving that to first place.
Does this also mean we're forcing Dreamcore to come to trade softcore? Softcore Dreamcore?
I'm definitely going to be playing softcore at the start anyway. There's no way I'm playing hardcore in that. I don't think it's not a good idea on the start of early access, I think, to be playing hardcore.
All right, good stuff. So what we'll do, let's see if I can get this up here. We have got a spinny to winnie, and we're going to, whoever it lands on is going to be our first presenter. So let's give this thing a spin. Here we go. No dramatic music.
Wow, this is long.
Oh, okay, Try, you're up.
What?
You're up, Try. It's landed on you. Yes.
Ooh, just.
Templar, someone who has gone after and embraced the teachings of Dominus before them, with a little bit of a Templar spin on it. Without further ado, I say we go right into the tree. And
perfect.
Let's start with the side that inspired the entire class. We're going to start with the domination over 1 part of the tree. When I decided to design this particular class, it was with a singular node in mind, and it's at the very bottom of this segment of the tree. We will get to it momentarily. We'll do the build up to it. So this side of the tree is minion focused. The touch of God. So you guys might see a theme here with the names of the nodes. Your maximum minion count is set to 1. Gain the Dominate skill. Dominate allows you to dominate the soul or corpse of a monster, turn it into flesh and blood, and make it your minion. This skill has a minion limit of 1. You may socket 3 additional support gems into the Dominate skill above the normal limit. That would be 8 total support gems onto this minion. Minions affected by Dominate have 60% increased max life, Dominated monsters can be resummoned upon death, or after death. When a minion summoned using the Dominate skill dies, you take 33% of your maximum life as physical damage, and this can kill you. Little flavor over this one, I forgot it at the top. If offered the gift of domination, do not waste it, for God watches. So the whole idea here is really leaning into that fantasy of, I have no hordes, I don't have multiple minion types, I have a single minion. It's essentially a super juiced Spectre. It's not going to have the Spectre aesthetic or anything. It's going to, I imagine it would be the actual texture of the monster, maybe with a little bit of flair added to it, maybe some dark mist roiling throughout. But it's just that one monster that you are going to beef up to maximum. And this does play in not only to the later nodes here, but into other paths along the tree as well. And then we have our first set of dual nodes, and I will define this for all the viewers. You choose one of these nodes, you cannot choose the other node. Okay? So this is an either or, this is not an and. So the first dual node is God's chosen, and I'll read the lore first. Those chosen to see the true face of God shan't waste the opportunity. Your maximum minion count is set to 2. You gain a second dominate skill with the normal gem socket maximum. The second dual node is Godly Abominations. You may socket 2 additional support gems into the dominate skill, meaning you would have one minion with 10 different supports that you could attach to this one minion. Now, given the astronomical number of supports that we've seen, especially in recent builds, and how powerful they are, this is ridiculous, okay? But remember, you are putting basically all of your juice into this one other creature here. This is the final node. This is the one that I want to talk about for a bit and get immediate reactions on. Submit, heretic. All these are Dominus voice lines, by the way. Dominate may be used on non-pinnacle unique monsters. And the flavor is nothing is above God. So what this means is you can dominate the corpse of a unique monster that you've killed, whether it's a map boss, whether it's an area boss. That means something like the Crowbell. You could turn into your minion. It would be your one minion. It would be using all of its skills. You could juice it up with your various minion increases and all that, buff it up with auras and the like, and turn it into your servant. You can exert your domination upon it. So Dream, Sylver, I guess Dream first, since this is your first raw take on this. What do you think about being able to have unique monsters as minions?
I mean, that's busted, but 10 supports, dude. I mean, what's it? 10 support gems.
You can't have any other minions.
The unique monster is a really cool idea, though. I love the idea of that. Just like take a really cool map boss. It's a good idea.
That is the entire. That's what I wanted to build this Ascendancy around. I was like, oh, you know what would be really cool?
Yeah, because you'd be able to have so many different builds.
Yes.
Like you
exactly.
get like a map boss could be like really slow with these giant attacks, or it could be like a super fast.
Yeah,
boss. I like
spell-based, attack-based, all that. Yeah. So there would probably have to be some extra limitations set on here, like like Torgol, the guy who's inside the building. It's really hard to make those like capturable, but I'm sure there will be a lot that are mobile. I was debating over whether like the number. I don't know, like, is it powerful enough in of itself, just allowing you to dominate this one monster?
Yeah, it's so difficult, isn't it, when you're doing these, because we know so little about the balance of the game that we just have to, and everyone watching, right, we just have to go like, oh yeah, we'll suspend disbelief for a minute, and it's just the concept. But this is obviously why we've got Dream here, because he can actually talk some sense into us, about what's ridiculous or not. So finally we've got an adult in the room.
I know I'm a bit insane.
All right, where do you want to go next, mate?
Let's go to domination over many. This part of the tree is focusing more so on that horde style of gameplay, and in particular auras. Okay, so the first minor note, aura effect and spirit, just gives you some increased aura effect and 20 additional spirit. And spirit is that new mechanic in Path of Exile 2 that works with auras and minions. I guess I should have explained that briefly. Instead of auras reserving your mana or life by default, they're reserving spirit instead, or using spirit instead. And then we have our first big significant node, Masters of the Dark, and Sylver has debated me on this one's use. Chat, commenters, tell me if you think this is cool or not. All right, so let thy controlled minds light the way forward. Your minions spread your auras affecting them to creatures around them in a 4-meter radius. They count as your auras. So what I was thinking, and this synergizes with later notes, but also what I was thinking is if in Path of Exile 2, perhaps you're incentivized to not always be up against the monster, but your minions are, and they're out of reach of your auras. They channel your auras onto themselves and creatures around them. So it would be the positive benefits that they're spreading to their other minions that are next to them, because you're not close enough. Or if there are more aggressive auras like Pride in Path of Exile 2 that are debuffing enemies, they would be doing that for you while you are super far away, shooting your machine gun from afar as a Templar, right? And then the next big node, the will of man. Your auras have 1% increased effect on others for each creature they are affecting. You also gain plus 10 spirit. The power of many shall overwhelm even the greatest of foes. Not only does this encourage you to get as many minions as possible, but if the auras are enemy affecting, like they're negative, like Pride, and they're affecting monsters around you, the more juiced up your map, the more monsters that are in this aura, the greater the power of said aura. So it does incentivize your minions to get into the fray, to get big juicy packs, and yourself to leap into the fray too, because of the next node. The light of divinity. He who stands grows in power from those who kneel. Your auras have 2% increased effect on you for each creature they are affecting. So this is the self-buffing part of it. So once again, it's like the last node, but for yourself. So yeah, this is all about auras, and I thought, how could you do a cool spin on auras in Path of Exile 2? And this is what I came up with. Initial thoughts, dreams, Sylver, on the aura part.
So the thing that this makes me think is, it really made me think about, I wonder what the baseline aura radiuses will be if they'll be altered in PoE 2. And maybe because there's more of a kind of mechanical combat approach that they're trying to take, it might be things where, if you imagine auras like Pride, like you were talking about, they might really shrink that aura size down if they want that to be more of a melee focused aura potentially. And I know that they're trying to do a lot of these, even if the way they're talking about projectiles, so that you can't off-screen and they kind of fade off after a while. There's a lot more of this range dynamic and design happening.
That is what I was thinking, because they don't want everything to be screen blasting, especially at the start in PoE 2. I was kind of thinking that same idea with auras. Like, are auras still going to be basically screen wide, or are they going to be a little bit more intimate? And if you want to make them screen wide, you're going to have to invest more. Because another thing in PoE 2, I think that it's going to be way better than in Path of Exile 1, is couch co-op and playing with other players. So auras, I think, are going to be a lot more valuable, and a lot more people are going to be incentivized to dip into them, especially if they're playing with those other players. This is all about buffing yourself, and I lied. This is actually where the second most busted node is, so Dreamcore, get ready. And it's the first node right here. So you start out with some basic life regen for yourself, some increased attack and spell cast speeds, and then we get into selfish ambitions. Helping others is a waste of God's gifts. Your auras only affect you. Aura cost is set to 12% of spirit per aura. So you can juice yourself up with as many auras as possible. Yes, I know. This is crazy. This is very crazy. The numbers might have to be adjusted here, okay? Maybe it's 20% per aura, okay? Because, some might be 50% reservation like in Path of Exile 1, okay? So maybe we have to adjust some numbers here. But essentially, making yourself as powerful as possible merely through auras. Shrink not from God. Your movement speed cannot be slowed. 15% increased movement speed. So this one's kind of like the Juggernaut's Unstoppable node. And the flavor text is embrace the swift and warming light of godliness. And then we end this part of the tree with a dual node. The first is Nightmare Prevails. The darkest secrets of corruption are yet to be unveiled. Every 12 seconds, become Nightmare for 6 seconds. Nightmare grants ailment immunity and this dispels current ailments on you. And you gain 10% increased action speed. So this is kind of like the current Trickster node that cycles every 6 seconds between 40% reduced damage from, I think it's hits, and then from dots. I know that's not the exact terminology, but that's the same sort of vibe I was going with for this one. Or you can choose this other one, Die in Awe. And this one is the same, but it's every 16 seconds, gain Awe for 8 seconds. Awe grants 30% more damage, 30% more attack and cast speed. So this is, like I said, truly focusing on yourself, and you're getting those brief windows almost where you're empowered by corruption, by divinity, and you're just going absolutely bananas for that brief period, and then you're chilling out for a little bit. So it's a lot of investment for brief windows of power, because remember, this is your ascendancy. And you're only getting this stuff for 6 seconds at a time, 8 seconds at a time, but it's an extreme amount of power that you're getting. So it's not something like, the Berserker, where you're getting 40% more damage for the loss of life. Always. These are temporary buffs here. And I think that's the Dominator. I think that's it.
Bravo.
Awesome. The aura node that sets 12% is completely busted, but we actually haven't seen. Have we seen any auras yet in Path of Exile 2? Have they shown any off? I don't think they have.
We've only seen like the names there, but we haven't seen what they do or how much they reserve. You're totally right.
I expect auras to be significantly different in Path of Exile 2. I think that they're going to be a lot more situational, like not something you just take on every character.
I'm going to combat you, Dream. So if there are more auras and they're more niche and we have so many more gem slots available, I feel like auras might be something that's going to be a staple for like every character, especially if you have nothing else to do your spear with. I mean, you have the automation.
I think most characters will use auras, definitely.
Oh, you do? Okay.
But the thing is, there's also, if you've noticed, there's tons of extra reservation skills that they're adding in, and also you now need to reserve like trigger gems and things like that. So builds will have to be choosing between the two.
All right, Try. Thank you so much, mate. You need to get going.
I'm just gonna walk away. I'm gonna go see if she's gonna calm down.
Okay, all right, mate. All right, we'll leave the vid up then, and I guess so. Now the question is, how do you want to do this, mate? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? I'm gonna let you decide.
I'm happy to go. I'll go.
Okay, awesome.
Right, this class is called the Oathbreaker. The idea of this class is a Templar who has kind of lost their way. This corruption has swept through the land. It's kind of destroyed their life, and they're kind of in a bit of a split mind. Half of them sort of remembers who they were, remembers what they stand for, and the other half is kind of, dark thoughts are creeping in and they're questioning what's right and wrong. Let's get into the flavor text. You were a Templar, a devout, faithful, and honorable paladin. You put your belief in divinity and trusted the righteous path without hesitation. But what happens when the light of your faith dims and the path ahead becomes shrouded in darkness? The corruption has seeped into the very land itself and into you. You begin to question what is right and what is wrong. Your loved ones have been slaughtered, your faith has been shattered. They've taken everything from you, all but the armor on your back and the weapons at your side, the steel and plate that has kept you alive. Embrace the chaos, thrive in it, and wreak havoc. It's time to take back what is yours. Alright, so let's start up at the top of the tree. This Ascendancy is kind of split into two halves, and you'll see that when we get into it. But we're starting off, and the class is very sort of defensive focused. There's a lot of defense aspects, and there's also a bit of aggression there from defense. So let's begin with Indomitable Bastion. So there's the small node there has a bit of increased armor and a bit of increased active block endurance. But Indomitable Bastion, 100% increased active block endurance, 1% faster active block endurance restoration for each blocked hit in the past 10 seconds, and ignore all movement penalties from active block. We know that there's going to be a mechanic in Path of Exile 2 called active block, and I believe you only get it when you're using a shield. When you use it, you bring your shield up in front of you. We can see it in some footage that we've had. And any strikes or projectiles that come in from the front and hit your shield, you block those. And while you block them, you have an endurance bar. And that endurance bar gets depleted each time you block, and presumably it also gets depleted slowly while you're holding your shield up. When it gets to 0, you fall out of the active block and you get stunned. This node here it basically doubles that active block endurance bar. So you have a lot more opportunity to block. You have like a ton of extra endurance there to block incoming hits. Meanwhile, the 1% faster active block endurance restoration for each blocked hit in past 10 seconds, that's going to like speed up the recovery after you come out of block. And the last node there, ignore all movement penalties from active block. If you've seen in the footage, when someone uses active block, they are really slow. Now, we're not actually sure on the mechanics of this, but I think it's probably something like a 50% less movement speed modifier. This is probably the strongest part of this node, even though it doesn't really appear to be that strong. But ignore all movement penalties from active block means that you're going to be able to move at normal movement speed while using active block. This will also override any, because I expect there to be unique items that interact with active block. For example, there could be one that makes active block a lot stronger and makes you even slower, or even makes it so you can't move. You know, this would bypass that as well. And then we have two nodes coming off this. One is even more defensive and one is a bit offensive. So let's go for the defensive one first. So we've got the small node that leads up to that. So Impregnable Fortress. You can block from all sides during active block. 25% less area damage taken from hits during active block. So how I imagine this being is, the animation for this would be, you know, the character brings up their shield and they've got some like magical shields all around them, just blocking them from all sides. And I would hope they would also use your MTX, so you could, you know, show off your MTX a bit. So you've got like magical shields, right? But if there's a big boss attack, or let's say a larger monster comes along and it does like a big slam on top of you, or if there's a slam coming up from underneath you, from under the ground, you can't block that. So that one's very defensive. And then across the other side, we have sort of offense being gained from defense. So we've got the small node there, 15% increased armor, 15% increased attack damage. And then we have Ultimate Reprisal. So your retaliation skills deal double damage, grants Peacemaker skill, and cannot be stunned during active block or while using retaliation skills. This node here, the retaliation skills dealing double damage, that's kind of been stolen from the old Gladiator that had double damage on their counter attacks before it got changed up. And I just really like the idea of this more, you know, like a slower play style where instead of sort of constantly hitting, you know, with a normal attack and dealing a bit of damage, you have this counter attack that's not up very often, and when you do hit with it, it deals a massive amount of damage. Let's talk about Peacemaker. Let me bring it up here. Peacemaker is a retaliation skill. This is the only place you'll be able to access this retaliation skill. This retaliation skill requires you to have a flail and a shield. So bring your flail down upon your foes with brutal precision and fatal certainty. Enemies near the initial impact are also hit by a devastating aftershock. Enemies brought low enough are cold with double efficacy. So we've got some stats here. And enemies hit by the initial impact have their armor broken. I haven't actually put a value on there, but let's just say it's some relevant amount of armor, you know, for a level 20 skill.
Yeah. And
aftershock deals 50% more damage with hits. It has Culling Strike, and it has 100% increased Culling Strike threshold. Now, this is a stat that I'm not sure is going to exist. In Path of Exile 2, Culling Strike works differently. Instead of having one fixed number of 10%, each rarity of monster will have different amount of Culling Strike. So normal monsters are cold at 30%, magic at 20%, rare at 10%, and unique at 5%. So this would double that, which is really, really powerful. But yeah, this is meant to be a really, really impactful kind of finisher ability. Not something that you're going to be spamming because of that cooldown. And that was kind of what I was going for with this. One really strong attack, not very often.
I think there's so many players, myself included in this, that love the blocking like play style and that like staying in there, turtling up, you know, and blocking it. So yeah, this offers some.
I love the idea of active block. This one of my favorite things that they've added to the game, even though I haven't played with it yet. Is active. It just looks so cool.
Yeah, that would be the first thing I do.
Let's get into the next weapon node, the Flail Master. You get a bit of attack damage and attack speed on the small node. Weapon sets with a flail equipped grant 8 additional weapon passive points. So, I mean, this is just completely busted, I think. 8 is probably not the correct number, but we know that in PoE 2 there's going to be weapon swapping, and when you weapon swap, you get different weapon passive skills. So any set that has a flail in it will go on 8 additional skills that you can put into the tree wherever you want, whenever that weapon set is active. So 8 is probably too much, but that is really cool. I love the idea of taking this node and actually having a double flail setup. One is fully defensive, all invested into a defense. The other is fully offensive, and you switch between the two. But That's a cool idea.
I wonder as well if we're going to get like a unique that's like a two-handed flail maybe or something, right? And that would really like allow that kind of offensive versus defensive, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's the half of the tree that is like, the Templar that remembers who he was, remembers what he stands for. Now we get into sort of the half and half territory. So let's talk about the duo node, the duo selection node. We've got two symbols here. Let's start off with symbol of selflessness. You create selfless ground when hit, lasting 4 seconds. So selfless ground, you and allies standing on selfless ground gain plus 3% to all maximum resistances, 30% increased global defenses, and 50% reduced effect of curses on you. This one is kind of the positive, the old Templar kind of remembers who he was. The idea of this one is that when you actually get hit, it provides a defensive effect. Now the other one is more of a glory hog. Your hits create selfish ground lasting 4 seconds. Enemies standing on selfish ground have minus 10% to all resistances, 30% reduced global defenses, and 10% increased effect of curses on you. So, 10% increased effect of curses on them. So from there, we move on to the next node, and this node is once again a bit OP, I think. But this is something I wanted to see in PoE 1 for a while, and it doesn't exist because it's probably a bit OP. The Venerated Soil. So, Venerated Soil, ground effects you create have 100% increased effect. This is going to affect any ground effects you create. It doesn't matter which one you make. It's 100% increased effect of any ground effect. So it could be consecrated ground, whether that's going to return in Path of Exile. Any of those different ground effects that you get from unique items, especially I think this is kind of build enabling in that aspect, that you could take a weird unique item that creates its own unique ground effect and make it really strong. And obviously this is going to double all of those benefits from the first ground effects. But this is 2 nodes that you're investing in, right? So it is quite a big investment. And that's kind of similar with that first branch with the block. You could go into the full defensive setup, but that is two ascendancy points that you're investing, so it's quite a big investment.
Yeah.
So yeah, Venerated Soil, that's pretty strong. All right.
Awesome.
So that's like I said, the half and half. Now we have the corrupted aspect, the part where the Templar's kind of losing his mind a bit and falling into darkness. So let's begin with the Chaos branch. All right, Corrupted Pact. 2% more armor for each Chaos passive skill allocated with non-weapon passive skill points. 1% less maximum spirit for each Chaos passive skill allocated with non-passive skill points. So this one is a bit of a blocker for the node that comes after it, because I think the node that comes after it is very strong. And to get to that, you need to go through this. And this is the idea here is that, you're investing into Chaos passive skills because you're going for a Chaos focused build. And by doing that, you are making a massive trade-off. You're gaining a huge amount of more armor. And I do think more multipliers are going to be something which is extremely scarce in PoE 2. Maybe they won't even exist at the start, but we'll see. And 1% less maximum spirit. So there's no way of getting around that, right? You're going to have a lot less spirit when you use this with a Chaos build. And that's kind of the design that I was going for there. It's a massive trade-off. But the next node only has 1 modifier. So Dark Infusion. 1% increased Chaos damage with hits per 200 armor. So once again, hits only, no ailments, no poison cheese there on this class. Right? So 1% increased Chaos damage per 200 armor. Now, to put this into a comparison there, Replica Dreamfeather is 1% increased attack damage per 450 armor. And that's a bad base, right? You have to get a load of flat damage yourself. You could use this one with any weapon you wanted to, and you could decide how you get that Chaos damage however you want, whether it's flat added Chaos damage, whether it's Fizz or another damage type converted into Chaos, right? I think that one is extremely powerful. It may not look like it, but that is extremely powerful, especially when you start to consider things like Wither and stuff like that. Once you go into a Chaos spec, maybe you get some Chaos penetration, things like that. That's really, really strong.
Yeah, and this is like, I think any stat stacking kind of node, right? Like whether it's attribute, armor, or whatever, is always, people always find a way to break the game with it, right? Like there's always something about it. So yeah, I think you're right. It's simple but deceptively powerful. Yeah,
I just really like the idea of making that massive trade-off on Corrupted Pact, because I think Spirit is going to be really important for any build. So, getting that less multiplier there is quite bad, but you get that huge upside on the end. The last node on the tree, is Whispers of Gore. So there's a bit of lore there going on. So Gore is one of the Beyond bosses that you can fight in PoE 1, and I think that Path of Exile 2 is going to have a lot of Beyond focus going on. I think that's going to be the main part of the story. So this is kind of where that whole darkness is coming from. This is the corruption that has got into this guy's head. So Whispers of Gore. You hear the whispers from beyond. Every 4 seconds, you gain one of the following for 8 seconds, and the interval is 4 seconds, so you're going to have 2 of these benefits up at a time, and it cannot choose the same effect twice in a row. Okay, Your hits are always critical strikes and have plus 100% to critical strike multiplier. Hits against you are always critical strikes. 100% chance to defend with 200% of armor. Nearby enemies have 100% increased armor. Active block endurance is fully restored and cannot be depleted. 10% increased damage taken from unblocked hits. And lastly, your damage with hits is lucky, damage of hits against you is lucky. So there's one very powerful upside and one very dangerous downside. The idea of this node though is that there's always a way for you to solve the downside so that you can take this node. It's going to be a big investment, but there's always a way. So with the first crit node there, you can stack up reduced extra damage from crit on you. With the armor one, you can either stack up, if you're playing a Fizz build, you can stack up stats which bypass armor, or you can not play a Fizz build, right? There's always the potential there that you go in the Chaos branch and you play a Chaos build, or you play an Elemental build. Then you have the active block endurance one, 10% increased damage taken from unblocked hits. There's obviously that node on the other side that you can take, which makes it so you can block in all directions, which makes it so you can block way more hits. So that's less chance of taking that 10% increased damage. And lastly, of course, if you get a way for enemies to deal unlucky damage against you with that last modifier, that will cancel out the lucky and that modifier won't do anything anymore. So there's a way that you can fix everything on this node, and then it makes it all upside and it's very powerful. And the idea of the interval there is that, you know, there's going to be some nodes here on this thing that you probably don't want, but the idea that it lasts 8 seconds is that you can have the one that you want or the several ones that you want more often. That's the class.
Dude, I absolutely love it. There's so much to talk about that I want to kind of ask you about. So the first thing is, I absolutely love the venerated ground, the ground effect node, right? Like that is. Like you say, there's so many things where I think, oh, that would be such an interesting build. You get burning ground from a unique item or from a skill, and then you're just building around that. I can imagine it would open up a bit more design space as well, where they could use this elsewhere potentially. As you said, like there's a couple of things where we don't know how busted like something getting 8 extra points would be, but that's just a numbers thing, right? The idea I think is solid. The block stuff, as we sort of talked about earlier, I think is like so up my street, and I'm sure some people who are watching this are going to be like, the only downside to these nodes, I think, is that I would feel like I have to take them every time I choose this Ascendancy. So every one of my Oathbreaker builds would be like, yeah, but I want the block stuff. Yeah, but I want the block stuff.
That's kind of what I wanted to go for, is that the powerful nodes are almost always 2 Ascendancy points to invest into, like the same with the soil, right? Which means that you can't take everything.
I think this is just true for most people. It's like one of the best things is when you've got so many options and you feel like you just can't get enough. And that was kind of the glory of the PoE 1 passive tree, right? Like the Path of Exile passive tree, you're always feeling like, oh, but what if I just traded this off and got a few more travel nodes, right? I could get to this cluster. And I think you've really done an amazing job of kind of getting that in here. I love the lore of this because it felt very PoE, which is like, you're kind of good, but kind of bad. Right, like no one knows. Like you're sort of a hero, but you're an anti-hero.
I was trying to lean into it a bit because the whole like good aspects of a Templar. I mean, when you kind of read up on the Templar lore, they're not really that good. You know, they're kind of good in their own light, right? In their own faith that they think they're good, but they're kind of not. They're not really that good. So
definitely one side of the story kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see if Tri comes back or not. He's had to just go and attend to his daughter. So he might be back. He might not. We'll leave him up and see what happens. In the meantime, we'll get on to the last Ascendancy, which is going to be mine, and that is the Zealot. I'm calling it the Zealot, and like I said before at the start of this video, we all sort of were chatting and we were like, oh yeah, Dark Paladin's so cool, bro. Like, you know, like when I was like, and I 100% wanted to do the same thing, and I will do at some point. However, I thought just to change things up and offer a slightly different theme, I thought, what if I just went super classic? And for me, this is like a really strong theme that I've always loved in games. I love it in D&D. I love that kind of honor, justice, divinity, paladin guy. And I think there's a huge desire for it in the community, in the ARPG community, because, you know, D4 decided not to do it. PoE didn't really have it. It sort of did, but the theming wasn't super strong in terms of like that divinity. So I decided that I would take a stab at it myself. This class, like I say, is very much like the Holy Paladin kind of thing. I wrote a little bit of lore and stuff just to kind of get myself into what does that mean in PoE. So divinity is a guiding path for those willing to walk it. Though first it must be seen. The Zealot is a beacon to light the way. His sacred duty to walk towards the dark so that others might be found in his wake. A shepherd for the blind, an adjudicator for the profane, faith is his weapon against the corruption that even now seeps through the veins of Rayclast. First off, I'm going to start with what I think is like something that everyone's been talking about and I just was really thinking about a lot. So we're coming down to the left here and we're getting increased attack and cast speed and crit multi. So crit is going to be a bit of a theme going on in this, and I've kind of pulled a bit from the Inquisitor and taken some inspiration from PoE 1 there. So the first node is Radiance. Critical strikes elemental damage becomes radiant damage. Radiant damage ignores elemental resistances. So that's like that PoE 1 Inquisitor sort of node there, that your crits ignore elemental resistances. But then we're gaining some extra nice little thematic benefits here, and mechanical, where enemies who have been hit with radiant damage do not trigger on-death effects, their corpses cannot be detonated, and any debuffs they inflicted end when they die. I think this is like a nice little package of bonuses that I don't think in of themselves are like crazy powerful. I love this idea that you're kind of cleansing the enemy. You're putting their soul to rest, you're putting their body to rest, and nothing can kind of happen to them after they've died. I think that would just be like a huge peace of mind thing. I guess like we see with Trickster in PoE 1, where it's like, oh, don't worry about drowning orbs in Uber Eater or, you know, whatever it is. So that's the T1 node. And then if you want to, you can double down on this. You get some attack speed and critical multiplier. So this first section works for spells and attacks, whereas this second section is more if you want to lean into attacks. And then you get Zeal. So I had to have a node called Zeal, obviously it's the Zealot, and only a Zealot can deliver prophecy is the little tagline there. Gain 1% increased critical strike chance per 1% of current life you have. Dealing a critical strike with a weapon empowers that weapon, so that specific weapon slot that you've used, with Zeal. Zeal grants all attacks deal radiant damage, 20% increased attack speed, and radiant damage can apply the original damage type's elemental ailment. So one of the things that you're losing in this first section is the ability to apply your elemental ailments, because you're converting away from the elemental damage into this kind of pseudo new damage type.
Yeah.
And that felt important because, like you said, these T1 nodes, you have to be careful about how much power you give. So it had to be a little bit of a trade-off. Whereas with this one, if you want to double down, your skills remain is keeping its ability. So say you're doing some fire damage, you can still ignite, etc., etc. But yeah, this was just a chance to get some big crit chance, giving yourself more of a chance to get those crits to trigger the Radiance in the first place, but then you're also getting these extra benefits of having Radiance, so you don't have to crit. So this is kind of like almost guaranteeing, you know, from that point on, you're guaranteeing that if you just crit once every now and then, like Elemental Overload, you're always going to be ignoring that damage. It's kind of a quality of...
I love that combination, because now you can go for Elemental Overload with that type of spec.
Everyone had been talking about Radiant damage. Could we do Radiant damage? Could there be a Templar spec? And I was like, okay, this is my attempt at it. Next up, let's do one of the single nodes. I think what we'll do is we'll come down on the bottom here. You get 10% all Ellie res, 10% armor and energy shield. And then we've got peace. Find solace in solemnity. Energy shield recharge begins if you have not attacked and energy shield recharge has not stopped recently. Energy shield recharge cannot be interrupted until it has recovered an amount of energy shield equal to your maximum and you take 30% less damage during energy shield recharge. There's a lot of words here. What I'm trying to get across with this is the first line here, if you haven't attacked and it hasn't started recently, is essentially you can be hit. So as long as you're not attacking, you're like able to find peace and start your recharge. So if an enemy's hitting you, and you just choose to stand there or run away and take it, you're going to get that. You're essentially not stopping the recharge start. The second thing is once it's started, it can't be stopped until it has reached the maximum amount of energy shield that it would recover. So this is like a weird new little way of doing this. I don't know if we have anything like this in PoE 1, but it's kind of this halfway ground where if it started, it will at least recover the 5,000 that you have instead of stopping when hit. And then on the bottom, you're taking 30% less damage whilst it's recharging. So that felt important as well for the second line, because it's not going to just infinitely keep recharging as you're taking damage. So you're only getting this 30% less damage bonus whilst it's still recharging to that maximum. It's a bit of a wordy node and stuff. I hope that's kind of come across, but something that I thought could be interesting with this, probably something you might like, is that first line. It allows you a way to essentially, there might be unique items in the game which double your recharge start. There might be things on the tree or negatives, downsides, something like a keystone that we don't know of that's like, 200% longer recharge start. And this would essentially override that. This would give you that like 4-second guaranteed, I can recharge if I just don't attack.
That node is really strong. I really like that node a lot.
Cheers, man.
That, you take a little bit of damage and you get your recharge started, right? And so does it recover? So it can recover your entire maximum once it's started. So for example, let's say you only take 100 damage, you have 5,000 energy shield. Once it starts recharging, it can recover 5,000 total energy shield. So even if you're taking hits during...
Exactly. So it's essentially using like a 5,000 life flask or energy shield flask, right? In theory. Yeah. That's the idea of it.
It's really strong. But it's a good node. Yeah, I like it.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Okay, let's now move over to a tier 2 branch. And this is good. I think this really sums up. This is probably my favorite. And that is Divinity. So we get LE resistance, 10 to all LE res, and then we get armor and energy shield again, and then we get Divinity. This is a bit of a new mechanic that's added to the class once you take it. So dealing damage to enemies grants Divinity instead of Vile Souls. Any modifiers that affect Vile Souls gained instead affect Divinity. So this is like you're too pure to use any Vile magic. You gain 3% increased life and energy shield recovery rate per 5 Divinity, and your maximum Divinity is 100. So you can essentially get 60% increased life and energy shield recovery rate if you build this up. My thinking for this is that you're not going to be getting from 0 to 100 in like 4 seconds. The idea is you're building this up over like 10 to 20 seconds or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you gain the Divinity skill. You spend any current Divinity you have, healing yourself and your allies. You gain additional effects when spending maximum Divinity. This is essentially how you spend your Vile Souls. This is how you're spending your Divinity. You recover 1% of maximum life and energy shield per 1 Divinity spent. Allies recover 50% of this amount. And then spending 100 Divinity at once removes all debuffs on you and 1 debuff on allies. So this is kind of like leaning a little bit into that support, paladin, healer, kind of priest thing. And I wanted to like offer a bit of that. Kind of what the Guardian felt like it was trying to do a bit and did in different ways. But we know that co-op's going to be a bit more powerful. So I was like, let's add some ability to like heal your allies, but also if you don't want to, you're playing solo, this is just as powerful for you.
I think it's really easy to look at this in Path of Exile 1 context and think that's not very strong, right? But in Path of Exile 2, we already know that they're trying to make it so that you can react more to damage. The time that it takes, for you to actually die from damage on average is going to be a little bit longer. I just really like the idea that you have this kind of saving grace button that you can use.
Yeah, maybe I should have called it that. Maybe that's what the skill should be called. Saving Grace. Yeah. And maybe you don't even know how much divinity you've got stored up, right? Because you haven't got time to look, and then you're like, oh, thank God I had 80, right? Thank God I didn't use it on something else.
Yeah.
And so using it on something else, let's get into that, because I wanted to offer some more interesting ways. Now we've got this mechanic of using this skill to spend divinity, like what else could that do for us? So let's have a look at the tier 2 branches, and then we've got a trio node here. So we've got 3 options that you can pick from to really customize how you want to like play this. I'll go from the bottom, we'll go round. So Divine Vigor. All of these have a stat I want to put on the note first, is that you now gain 2 divinity per second. So this is just a passive divinity generator. So not only are you getting it from hits and kills and, you know, like you would Vile Souls, you're also getting this as well. So essentially in 50 seconds, you're going to have 100 divinity. Divine Vigor, gain 100% increased maximum life and energy shield per 2 divinity. Spending 100 divinity extends this benefit to your allies for 10 seconds. This is obviously 50% increased max life and energy shield. That's a very big number. And then also when you're, you know, if you are doing some party play, you see your allies getting chunked, you can just hit this button and then you're spending all of your divinity. So you lose the buff, but you're transferring it over to them. Then we've got let's go into the attack option. You've taken your radiance damage, you're doing crits. Divine Fury. Your next attack gains 1% increased critical strike chance per 2 divinity spent, and your next attack gains 2 critical strike multiplier per 1 divinity spent. Spending 100 divinity guarantees your next hit is a critical strike. So this is all about, this isn't like the previous one where you're gaining this benefit passively for holding the divinity. This is like, I'm spending my divinity and this next hit is going to be like a smite. I'm calling, you know, the holy light from the heavens and I'm going to smite the hell out of you. And you're gaining a ton of multiplier. If you save it all up, you know, you're gaining a ton of multiplier. But then, you know, there's an opportunity cost. And I like that about this dynamic, that now you don't have any heal stored, right? So this is very much like a offensive version. And then we've got something that's kind of in the middle. Spending your divinity also empowers your auras. Gain 1% increased effect per 2 divinity spent for 6 seconds. That should be spent. So when you spend divinity, you're gaining the 6-second increase to your auras. Spending 100 divinity extends this to 10 seconds. So you're getting a duration buff for saving up to 100, but this is just giving you increased aura effect when you need it. And so not only maybe like, say you take a big hit, you're down to like 20% life, you spend your divinity to get your heal, but you're also then getting empowered. So you're getting empowered maybe defensively, offensively, however you decide to build your auras, you're getting more of that.
That one is really strong. You know, you could find a way to deal a lot of damage to bosses. Obviously, like, bosses grant Vile Souls as they, like, you know, get damaged. So if you have, like, a lot of damage, you can maybe keep up that aura effect all the time, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah.
If you can, yeah. You gotta be dealing a lot of damage.
Yeah, for sure. And this is what I really like about these. I think they're really solid ideas, and then maybe that needs to be 1% increase per 3 divinity, right? Or it lasts 4 seconds, or, you know, and you can just tweak these numbers to dial it in. Let's go up and to the right. So we'll go increased attack and cast speed, armor and energy shield, and then banishment. Hitting an enemy has a 25% chance to nullify a modifier on them. If an enemy mod is not removed, then they will take 6% increased damage from you, stacking 8 times up to 48%. You can only nullify a mod every 4 seconds. So say in like a 32 second fight with a rare, then you're able to knock all the mods off them. And I think that's like just a interesting way of essentially adding defense the longer you're in the fight.
I really like this idea that you can take this, and then maybe when your character's a bit stronger later on, you can spec out of this and spec into something else. So that's a cool note. I like that.
Let's do the last single note. So we've got Smiting Judgment. I imagine, what would it be like to be an auto bomber, like a holy auto bomber? And I sort of thought, like, let's like bring this in a little bit, like this passive effect. So whilst in the presence of enemies, so this isn't going on all the time, every 4 seconds there's an equal chance for you, an ally, or an enemy to receive judgment. So it's just split percentage amongst the number of entities on screen. One of them will get judgment. When receiving judgment, enemies are hit with the Smiting Judgment skill. Just imagine Smite, the skill Smite, right? but it deals radiant damage. It goes into your skill UI, you can add sockets to it, and you can craft it like any other skill, and you and allies recover 25% of life and energy shield. You've got this sort of beams of light coming down from the heavens. They're like periodically hitting different enemies or you, and if they hit you or an ally, they're healing you. If they hit an enemy, they're doing damage. And you can spec it how you want then, right? So maybe you put some freeze, effects on it, so you're periodically freezing certain enemies.
Offensively, you'd still want like the 4-second proc, right, against a boss, because this is going to be part of your damage. Maybe you could do it so that you heal like half or something like that when you're in the presence of a unique enemy.
I think you're 100% right. I should just go back to halving the healing.
Yeah.
And then we've just got the last two nodes. So Chaos Resistance, Armor and Energy Shield. You've got this duo node, and this is kind of not dissimilar to what you did with the ground effect stuff. It's interesting that we because I really like the consecrated ground thing and what it enables on the Inquisitor. So we've got Unity of Faith, but this works a bit differently. So your energy shield regeneration is equal to your life regeneration. That's the same. Standing still creates consecrated ground, but you cannot equip life flasks. And then you've got a different version of this, which is Aegis of Faith. I'm really curious what you think of this. Your energy shield gains Aegis. Aegis is equal to 50% of your energy shield and takes damage before your energy shield. So you're essentially getting a shield on your energy shield. Standing still creates consecrated ground, same as the last one, but consecrated ground instead affects your Aegis. So it doesn't give you life regen or energy shield regen like this node would. Instead, what this does is it recovers this new Aegis thing that you've got. So you've got like this constantly regenning thing that goes over your energy shield. And again, you can't equip life flask. So this was, I was kind of thinking CI a bit when I was thinking this, or something like that. Like you're just going really heavy into energy shield.
Really like that, yeah, because obviously with the first node, you can't do that because you're scaling your life and then you're scaling life regen like how an Inquisitor would. Whereas this one is more focused in on energy shield, so you could do, low life, or if you take like a big hit that takes away all of your Aegis, and then it comes down to like a bit of energy shield, maybe it deals all of the energy shield or a bit, then the Aegis comes back in there and, heals up, and then of course you're not taking any damage to energy shield, so it can then recharge, which is that's a really cool idea.
And then we've got Walk of Purity. Yours is not a Path of Exile, but of Purity. How sweet. You create 1 meter of consecrated ground with every footstep. Your consecrated ground grows by 1 meter per second you stand on it. So I wanted to do something a little bit different to like lingering on you. I like the idea that it's affecting the arena. And so the idea is that if you stand still, then it will start to grow. And then that consecrated ground can also affect your allies and minions and things like that. I think there's just more interesting stuff going on there. And then on top of that, your consecrated ground basically gets like giga buffed. So you can only be affected by 1 ailment at a time whilst on the ground. You're hexproof, which is basically like what people got to anyway using the old consecrated ground, but I've just called it hexproof. And you gain plus 5% maximum chaos resistance. And we haven't really referenced much of it in this Ascendancy, but I thought this feels like the place to put it, and maybe this is worth investing the 2 points into alone, because you really need that max chaos res for some kind of I don't know, weird shenanigans with your amulet that you found or something like that. So
yeah.
That is the Zealot. Yeah, that's the Ascendancy.
I do really like that, especially like the Aegis node there at the end that we were talking about. I just really like the idea of being able to split energy shield up, and then you have those interactions going on. Like I said, being able to recharge energy shield because you're no longer taking damage to it is quite strong.
Yeah, mate, that's it.
We all have really. I was kind of expecting us to have a lot of overlapping things, but we didn't really have any overlapping things at all. So.
The only thing that felt slightly overlapping was just like the ground effect stuff, but yours was so different.
You've gone with like consecrated ground, which I think is a very Templar thing.
They're so different. This idea of like domination and stuff, with tries is like very kind of minion heavy and aura heavy, whereas yours is like much more shield based and kind of hit based and that kind of thing. So what I want to do is encourage you to head to the poll. I will be putting up, so for those of you watching live, I'll be putting up very shortly. If you're watching the VOD, you're watching this on YouTube, then go over, look into my community posts, and you will find the poll. Vote for who you thought was best, and remember, the stakes are pretty high. We're going to essentially be losing like the first divine orb of PoE 2 that we will ever gain, which is pretty depressing to think about. So yeah. Let's see what happens, dude. Thank you so much for joining. That was a blast, man.
Awesome.
But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this video, friends, exiles. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.